Welcome back to Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thank you so much for joining us. We are celebrating Women's History Month, March 2011, and we are celebrating with a professor of education from UC Riverside. Her name is Margaret Nash, and she specializes in history of education, and we're looking at women today. Thank you for joining us, Margaret.
Thank you for having me.
You know I'm the father of two daughters. I'm passionate about education for girls. So let's talk about educating women in America. Okay. Were women educated in America, let's say, 19th century?
Well, absolutely. There's sort of a common belief that women weren't educated in the 19th century, but in fact, there were hundreds of institutions, not called colleges, called seminaries, called academies, called collegiate institutions that provided a basic college-level education for women.
So at what point did America, at least, come to the realization that the mind had no sex, as the Enlightenment proclaimed? At what point did that happen?
Well, when the Enlightenment philosophies really came to this side of the Atlantic.
And is that around the Revolution?
Yeah, right around that time. So the late 18th, early 19th century, the Enlightenment beliefs about the importance of reason and rational thought, and that's what separated people from animals rather than men from women.
And I think there's also a perception that when women were educated, and even today there's this perception that they're educated in education, to be better mothers.
Yes.
Is that a true perception, or was it not always that way?
Well, yes and no. It depends on, what has really changed is what type of education we think mothers need.
This is my favorite part. I know the answer, so go. I read the notes before. This is the best part. Listen, go.
Well, even in the 19th century, even schools that advertised themselves as saying, we provide the best education to train girls to be mothers, taught things like philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, botany, chemistry, science.
And that's what I think is the best, because as you know, there is, I think it's true that girls are not treated the same today as it relates to scientific education as boys. We're working to change it. But here's the irony, like you said, in the 1800s, science was for the girls. The boys, that was below the boys.
Well, it wasn't, I mean, maybe it was, I don't know if it was below the boys or not, but the boys were busy studying the ancient languages. They were getting a classical education. They had to know Latin and Greek. And so they had less time for things like science, which were really seen as particularly suited to girls and women.
I hope we get back to that place, because I mean, I like female doctors, I admit it. I mean, I want to go to a female doctor more than a male. I don't know, maybe it's maternal, but that's just the way it is. When did that change, though?
It changed as science became more linked to technology, and therefore it became, you could get good paying jobs if you knew science. Then it became more important for boys and men, because Greek and Latin became less associated with high-paying occupations, and so not surprisingly then women started being
squeezed out
and into the languages, especially Latin.
I am showing my bias when I say this, because I have two daughters. They're 9 and almost 7. But today, women outnumber men in college.
Yes. That's
a stunning statistic, if you ask me. I mean, how did that happen?
Well, it happened slowly. I mean, for most of our history, that was not the case. I mean, it wasn't until the early 1980s.
So that's when the shift?
Well, women's numbers, women's higher education attendance is a steady curve up. It's men's that has gone up and down, actually, depending on wartime, depending on other needs. So yeah, it's men's that has been more erratic, and women's has been a steady increase.
Go girls. Happy Women's History Month. I'm Brad Pomerance. Margaret, thanks for joining us. Back to HLN.
Hello, I'm Senator Bob Huff. The deadline for applying for the California Senate Fellows Program is approaching quickly. I would encourage all students to consider this very worthwhile and valuable training program. The Fellows Program gives college graduates the opportunity to work full-time in state Senate offices like mine at the state capitol in Sacramento. Fellows are paid a stipend, receive health benefits, and earn graduate credit. Contact my office for more information and an application. The deadline to apply for the program is February 23rd.